Welcome back to the Pulse. Around the world, many governments are preparing for the festive season with the global economic crunch top of the agenda. But here in Ghana, government will have to deal with the turbulence on the labor front. First is organized labor's rejection of government's debt exchange program as they call a strike to demand that workers' pensions be exempt from that slash. The problem is even rather compounded by the pushback from the country's bondholders. Well, they've constituted a committee to engage government in response to the announcements that certain categories of external debts, whilst the clock takes towards December 27 deadline, government would also have to deal with workers' demand for a 60% increase in their base pay, actually. That negotiation has also been acrimonious, with Labour standing its grounds at 60% until just a week ago when they, of course, softened to a 50% hike in terms of the demand that they are making. Not a good time to be in government with all these pressures on your hands. Well, this afternoon on The Pulse, we're delving into these issues and finding out the turbulence that's happening and how it would obviously impact you and myself. So let's bring in Isaac Ofiaje with our research desk, who's been monitoring all of these happenings. Isaac, let's start off with a demand from organized labor. They are asking that pensions be exempt from the debt exchange program that the government is running. What more do we know about that program? The deadline has been extended. Any further updates on that?
Well, so this has actually become prudent or something the government must do because it's an IMF condition. Remember, we had a discussion on the current IMF 3 billion that if your debt levels are unsustainable, you have to go the long way to do a debt restructuring program before you be given the green light to actually go ahead to assess the package. And so government announced first was the domestic debt restructuring, and now we know there's going to be some form of restructuring for external creditors as well. But we're looking at domestic. That's where some of these issues have come up, especially those who are holding government bonds. And so if you look at government bonds, for instance, we have the ESLA bond and then also the Dachi bonds. And in there, we have, some of these pensions funds being used as, going to buy securities in actually these bonds. So if you look at ESLA bond, for instance, for 2020 and 2021, amount of pension funds, including SNIT, with ESLA bonds is about 1.83 billion Ghana cedis. And also, if you look at that of Dachi bonds, it's around, I think, 485.4 million, Ghana cedis.
So this
so
is
if you
what
combine the two, this is actually from the 2021 debt 2021, debt report.
Right.
So if you combine, pension securities with ESLA and then also with Dachi bonds, if you sum the two, is somewhere around, some 2.2 or more than 2.2 billion Ghana cedis of pension funds actually being used to buy government securities. It's not just, workers saying that they will not allow government to actually restructure their pension funds or something like that, but also we know that, one thing that has actually become a key issue here is compensation of employees. Now, organized labor is asking for 58% of an increase in their base pay. We know last year they requested for 25%. Government gave them 7%. This year, government is saying next year I can only afford 18%. So if you look at the chart on the screen right now, you're actually seeing the amount that government is using every year to actually compensate workers, including wages and salaries. Government is already anticipating that in 2023 they will have some of these agitations. That's why they are increasing, compensation of employees from 35.84 billion Ghana cedis to 44.99 billion Ghana cedis in 2023. What's actually, accounting for this 25% increment in the compensation of employees, we do not really know, but we know that workers have issues. They want their base pay to be increased. Also, they do not want their pension funds to be restructured.
But then we do know that compensation is also taking a huge toll on our national budget.
Well, so currently we need space, okay? So the space that we need is for us to be able to accommodate the 3 billion IMF program. Before I came to the studio, we're actually looking at our external debt, which has actually become an issue currently. And if you do the math, every year we are paying close to $2.4 billion, to service external debts, including principals, interest payments, and then also charges. So blessed, if you are spending 2.4 billion every year to service debt, external alone, and IMF is giving you, let's say, 3 billion for a 3-year program, it means that if you compare the total amount that you're actually spending to service your external debt, it's more or less about 87.5% of what you're actually receiving from the IMF. So if you take IMF's money and you are going to use that money upfront, you use close to 87.5% of that money to service your external debt alone. You need money to also service your domestic debt. So the key banter here is that governments actually first defaulted on its payment on domestic debt. We print cedis. So if you're a government and you default on payment of your debt in your domestic currency, it sends signal ahead that you can't also pay for your debt in external currency. And that's what the finance minister actually announced yesterday, that it will be very difficult to actually service our debts 2020. So they want a suspension. If we are able to get this suspension, then governments will be relieved from paying the 21.5 billion budgeted amount that they are saying they're going to use to pay for interest payments next year. That's close to $2.2 billion. That money will create space for government to actually do other things. But if this thing does not go through, then it means government is really going to struggle next year and even beyond. Because if you look at the Eurobond, for instance, we are supposed to pay close to $7.85 billion. If you look at the 10 years ahead of us, and about I think 70% or 43% of this money is supposed to be paid in the first 5 years ahead of us.
And there are comparisons of what's going on under the IMF program and what will happen post that period when, of course, we complete the program. What are we to expect?
Well, actually, when IMF is actually in your court, you expect that inflation will come down. You expect that your currency will be stable. You also expect that your external reserves will be strengthened, or you get more external reserves, because IMF is going to take care of, if not all, it's going to help you meet your what we call your balance of payments for the next 3 years. They're going to help you. Balance of payment actually really affects your external reserves, and as a result of that, it puts a lot of pressure on your local currency, resulting in a depreciation. So if you have IMF in the boat going to help you settle your balance of payment for the next 3 years ahead, you are sure that any other money you get, you're going to put it into judicious use rather than using it to settle loans and other things. So we know inflation is somewhere around 50%, but once the IMF program starts, we are expecting that inflation will come down possibly to 25 or 28, just like Bank of Ghana or the Ministry of Finance is targeting. There's a template for us to follow, which is Zambia. Right after they got the IMF approval, the executive board approval, we've seen their inflation dropping from a double digit now to a single digit. The Zambian kwacha is also one of the best performing currency against the dollar right now. So if you look at this template and what's going on across countries that have already taken the lead and getting an IMF package and what is actually impacting on their economy. Ghana, we are really hopeful that when we start this program, a lot of things will come down. And, currently we are actually seeing, the CD appreciating, and it's good news for everybody.
Isaac Ofeje with our research desk. At the flip side, though, there's another